Hi everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Kaleidoscope, the new Differing Minds podcast full of raw, powerful stories about race, neurodiversity, and intersectionality. I'm Jess, CEO of Differing Minds and host of the Kaleidoscope podcast. My pronouns are she, her. As a white cis woman, I want to use the privilege I have to raise the voices of others and enable us all to learn from them by hearing their stories. This started for me when I hosted a webinar back in May on race, neurodiversity and allyship, and the response was overwhelmingly positive and lots of calls out for more stories and for more opportunities for us all to learn. So hence Kaleidoscope. So today I'm so excited to welcome Krystle McGilvery for an episode about her experience as an undiagnosed neurodivergent Black woman in the workplace. Krystle is founder of Mind Over Money and is a renowned finance and behavioural psychology expert dedicated to providing finance education, business guidance and personal mentoring. With over 15 years of experience and specialised knowledge in behavioural psychology and decision making, she leverages her credentials as a CIMA Chartered Accountant, CBT Coach and ILM Mentor to create tailored solutions that enhance financial decision making and wellbeing. Her unique approach to blended finance expertise with behavioural insights has earned her recognition with awards such as the Great British Businesswoman Award 2022 and Top 100 Involve Yahoo Future Leaders 2022. Beyond her consultancy, she serves as the Director of charities like Abianda and Maths on Toast, Board Director of Thriveologie, and her insights have been featured on ITV, the Telegraph and BBC Radio, affirming her position as a leading voice in socially responsible finance and empowerment. Krystle, thank you so much for joining me today. It's such an impressive bio and story, and I'm so excited to talk to you.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you so much. And hold up, you read that intro like impeccably. Like doing my podcast intro, I have to take it 3 times. So wow to you.
Didn't tell you how many times I practiced it, but yeah, glad it went well on the day.
Yes, and thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. It'd be great to start if you could just tell me a little bit about kind of you and your identity.
Sure thing. So as you can see, I'm a lovely Black woman. I am born in London town, North London, raised in a single parent home with my wonderful mother and young brother. I am diagnosed as dyslexic, likely ADHD. Done a bunch of those assessments, spoke to an assessor as well, but I haven't done the official assessment, and have suspected autism since I was 18. But as a kid, which we might dive into, that was somewhat shunned. So I pushed that out of the window and was like, that's not me. But as I have grown and learned much more about this stuff, I'm like, maybe.
So interesting, isn't it? And I think I had the same thing when I had my ADHD assessment. They said I scored really highly for autistic traits, and it just has a different connotation, unfortunately, because of what our society's kind of done to it. So it can be more difficult to get your head around, even if you identify with certain parts of it. But yeah, lots to cover. And thanks for sharing all of that. So how was your experience as kind of a Black neurodivergent woman in employment? So when you were working, obviously at the moment you're working yourself, running your own successful business, but what was it like when you were in employment?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I was diagnosed in my late 30s, so a couple of years ago. And that means that throughout my whole career working, I went, fell straight into accountancy. When I finished my financial maths degree, I was none the wiser. I just came to work, did my thing, struggled with the way that I learned. So even going back before before working, my uni life was riddled with anxiety, panic attacks. I was given medication for it, which I didn't take, but I struggled immensely, which of course would carry through to the workplace. But, given my upbringing, the way that I was taught to deal with situations, I just kind of toughened up and put on this big shield and just got on with it, which of course now looking back, I can see how unhealthy that was. So yeah, I struggled many times in the workplace. And I think largely because I didn't know myself.
Yeah.
Which is the education I've now received.
So relatable. And I think when a lot of the time when I talk to workplaces, they are really keen to not all of them, but a lot of them are really keen to support neurodivergent people, but they're kind of waiting for neurodivergent people to have all of the answers and kind of what do you need. And so many people are going on their own self-discoveries that it's not that simple. We don't have all of that, that list of things that we need, and we know that that's going to work. So it can make it really challenging, I think.
It can.
And so why sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, totally with you. Like, I'm working, there's so many different areas to consider, but I'm currently putting together a program for an organization, of course, around financial well-being, confidence, etc. And one key area they want to kind of pay attention to is their neurodiverse employees. And actually, which is what I do, right? My financial education, neurodiversity, I combine the two. But they don't want to make it overtly obvious that it's a neurodiverse masterclass or workshop finance. It's more to embed it and weave it into the program instead. So that's, maybe for those people who aren't aware that they are, or maybe are not confident coming forward and saying that they are. But on the other hand, it's also great that the company is making the effort to address those challenges, although the people themselves aren't fully, I'm neurodiverse, this is what I need, give it to me.
Yeah, exactly. No, and that's so good, because then it allows the opportunity for people who maybe don't know that they're neurodivergent, or they are neurodivergent but don't want to share that with everybody yet, that they can still come along and figure that all out and learn. And so why did you leave kind of employment and start up your own thing and end up doing this?
I think it was a combination of reasons. I think one large part, of course, is wanting to do something more in line with my passion. I think, working in an organization where I'm the head of finance, which was fun because I love numbers, geek over here. I think I'd been teaching maths, and this is quite an interesting connection, actually. I'd been teaching maths since I was 18, and I had several occurrences where I was teaching somebody who clearly had learning difficulties or some kind of disability or something, and it wasn't apparent before I'd go to their house to teach them, or their parents weren't around. There's lots of issues in that environment, and it just kind of exposed me to a world that I was not familiar with at all. And it kind of, that contrasting with me working as an accountant I was working in advertising and technology, it was like, this isn't enough for me. Plus, like I said, in the workplace, I struggled with, I've got very different interests. I'm not really a TV watcher, right? I'm not really heavily into films. I'm not very good at small talk. In most of the organizations I worked in, I was maybe one of two of the only Black people in the organization. So that plus my neurodiverse traits just created this really difficult environment for me to be in. And I think largely because I wasn't aware of those differences, I just thought, this isn't working for me. I'm struggling. Meltdown. But and we spoke about this briefly, but having that knowledge and you working with organizations to bring this education into the workspace is so important. If somebody had done that kind of workshop in the organizations I had worked in, I would have been like, you're describing me. And then been able to reach out and get that knowledge, self-awareness, skills to be able to show up and do better, But those were kind of like the main reasons why I was like, this isn't working for me. I'm struggling with ABC. Let me just break free, and obviously partnered with the passion and the knowledge and expertise I had to actually make this a reality. It made sense. And I know that's a bit of a privilege, because if you don't feel like you have that, but you're struggling in the workplace from day one to such a different level, that can obviously put you in a really difficult place.
Totally. And you're so right about, I don't think I run any sessions in organizations where I don't get at least one person follow up with me afterwards or ask a question in the session about diagnosis, because something has kind of triggered something in them. And that wasn't why I originally set out to do this, but it's a very useful byproduct. And when I do it in schools as well, it's the same thing. I'm teaching the children so we teach children about neurodiversity because I want them all to be more accepting and to kind of grow into adults that can actually change the world. They're also a lot easier to teach than adults. But they're also like, oh, you've mentioned this thing and that thing, but I do that. Oh, that's interesting. But we're talking about it in a positive framing and positive context as well. So it's not like someone's at GP surgery or a specialist clinic, and they're being told, you know, that they've got this thing. So it can be a really positive way of doing it. And it's so interesting here you talk about, you know, your interests being quite different to a lot of other people. When you mention films, I never watch films. I've never watched films. I can't, like, for me, I can watch TV. So my partner gets so frustrated because he's like, you can watch episode after episode for hours of meaningless nonsense on television, but I want to watch a film with you. And you're like, no, it's 2 hours. I couldn't possibly sit down for 2 hours and watch a film. But I've always been like that. And I found it really difficult when I went to university. I remember really clearly, like, a lot of people kind of talk about, you know, actors, or you'll be doing a quiz and people will talk about actors. I literally didn't know anyone's names. Like, I didn't recognize anyone's faces, and like, you know, it's really hard, really hard. But then I don't have, you know, the added complexity kind of you had in terms, you know, every organization I've worked in, I look around and lots of people look like me.
Yeah.
I haven't had that in my degree. I looked around and lots of people look like me. I think looking back, I don't think there was a lot of people that look like you.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's a very, very different experience. And I did maths as well. So I did maths and statistics at uni.
It's such a thing. And this, we're talking about intersectionality, aren't we? And it shows up so much. I mean, in both of my studies, so my bachelor's and my master's, I studied financial maths and behavioural and economic science. So that's, you know, data, psychology, economics, some really fascinating stuff. But in both, these programs were filled mainly with Chinese people, white people, but not many Black people. So not largely white, but still not many Black. I was maybe one or two in both. And, you know, and that was what it was. And, you know, you had to accept that. And just jumping back on what you said about the film and stuff, I don't know any programs, anything, you know, or doing those trivia stuff. I'm like, give me a maths question. I'm right at the front. But ask me about who won this or the name of that person. I'm deadpan. I'm like, I don't know anything. But same, exactly. Yeah. And it's really interesting to hear you talk about watching series. So one of the reasons I actually don't watch series is because I will watch the whole thing straight. Like, I can't not. Like, so I don't watch any.
Yeah.
So more time to do other exciting things.
Well, that's what I always say. Like, there's just more interesting things to do than, watch a film. But then, you know, some people think that there's, you know, popular culture is really important to a lot of people, and, you know, you can learn a lot through that. But in the workplace, not only do people just kind of chat around that and, you know, socialize with those kind of topics in mind, but also, like we kind of mentioned, you know, events or like parties can be structured around quizzes or, you know, that kind of thing that really, it can make you feel further excluded because you just don't understand. People just assume that everybody watches this kind of stuff or, you know, engages in these kind of topics, and it's not the case.
And I think just on that last point, and I'm sure you've got more questions to kind of branch out into, but I think what's really important there, and I'd love to raise this just for people to be aware of, those who aren't interested in those topics, if they're not aware of their neurodiversity and their differences, they may already feel a bit odd. So they may already feel like, oh, I'm a strange one. Oh, I don't know this stuff. I don't fit in. So that can feel quite isolating in itself, which is what I experienced. You know, back in the day, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't have the confidence to stand tall in, I am different. This is what I like, not that. I don't care what you think. Yeah. So because I didn't have that confidence, because I wasn't self-aware, that meant that I felt less than. So in those situations, depending on who you're around, and I think this is actually much more, and it's great that you do stuff in schools, much more prevalent the younger you are. That's where bullying can come about, right? Where people who are different are excluded, are shunned, and then it just becomes a really unhealthy environment for someone to be in. So just kind of exposing that those differences are absolutely fine and wonderful. I think is great.
We just need to know who we are. Yeah. And do you think in hindsight, do you think it was when you're saying you felt kind of different or odd or an outsider or however you term it, do you think I don't want to put words in your mouth, this is a genuine question, do you think could you have put some of that down to you being Black and you thinking, oh, maybe this is why I feel so different? Or did you know, how was that kind of in your mind, like when you look back?
A really good question. And the answer is yes. 100% I did. And I've said this once before, and I think it's still quite a big thing for me to say. I think when you obviously come from a Black community and we deal with untold amount of issues anyway, to be in that environment and to experience such difficulty and then be the only Black person, the only thing I had to put it down to was what I knew was my only difference at that time. So I just assumed it was that. And I wasn't an angry person or anything like that because of it. It was more like, okay, well, this is what it is. And actually growing and realizing, oh, there's other things going on here, Chris, as well as that. So not negating it and saying it's not a statement of fact, because I have experiences where people said things about my hair and all kinds of really, really inappropriate things. But yeah, for sure. At that time, I did think it was completely that. And now I've grown and learned so much more. I'm like, actually, there's other things happening here, which all play a part. So yeah, good question.
But that's so interesting because like I can't even obviously I can't imagine because I can never share that experience, but I can't imagine having that confusion in your own head and then sort of like almost blaming one part of your identity just because you don't understand another part of your identity. And actually, to your point, like it is intersectional and that's your experience, but like you understand you're a Black woman, like you look at yourself, you want that you understand you're a Black woman. Like it's so difficult when you don't understand the other part about you, to be able to make sense of it all and why you're feeling a certain way. So yeah, it's so interesting. And do you think, with that in mind, like how would your experience have been different had you been diagnosed? So perhaps like when you were a child or even earlier than you just did?
Gosh, this is where we get to daydream, right? It's like, what could life have been? I mean, just to put it out there, because it's still a dream of mine to be an actress, right? That's what I wanted. Which I actually was reading about. A lot of autistic people become actresses or actors, and there's a correlation there, which is interesting.
That is really interesting.
Yeah. I can't
Hello, masking. Like you're just really good at it.
Exactly.
We've been practicing for a long time.
So we're good at this stuff. Yes, hire me, guy, by the way.
Yes.
Little bit of promo. Yeah, no, for sure. I think even down to dyslexia, my diagnosis for dyslexia was a shocker for me, 100%. You know, given the narrative we have about being dyslexic and intelligence or being able to study and all of this stuff, all the negative words that we hear, and the fact that I've studied so much. So, you know, my CIMA in itself is the equivalent of a master's, and I've got a master's, and I've got my, you know, all these things. And I remember the assessor saying, before we'd even finished the assessment, she was like, "You're definitely dyslexic." Like, she was like 100%. And that just made me think, so if you said that before you even completed the assessment, why has nobody noticed this?
It was that obvious.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, then we could go into a tangent here and talk about the lack of diagnosis of neurodivergence in Black people. Another conversation. I'm not fully up to speed on the stats, but we know that's a thing, right? But yeah, imagine if I was aware of that in my younger days. There was a time, so my brother is 2 years academically behind me. He's, 14 months, but whatever, he's 2 years behind.
Yeah.
And there was a time where he was actually getting better grades than me, which is shocking. That's 2 years, 2 levels behind, but his grades were better. And that obviously was down to some kind of learning challenge in my primary school days. But again, nothing was picked up. And then going into the workplace, and we're talking about those learning difficulties or, dyslexia. I hated speaking out loud. I hated reading, even down to, I remember we was playing this game, really terrible game to reference on this pod, but Cards Against Humanity.
Yeah.
We were playing that in the workplace, after hours. And even the simplest thing there, I think I had to read out the card, and I was just mortified. Now I don't care. I speak, I talk, I read, I do all those things. But I was just so aware that I struggle with this, or what if there's a word that I can't read? I wasn't aware that there was something going on that I can stand tall and this is who I am, accept me.
Yeah.
It was more that I felt less than. And then, of course, on the other side, whether it's ADHD or autism or whatever, yeah, of course, I think it's down to, again, the collective awareness in the workplace and acceptance of those differences instead of shunning people who were a bit different at work. So giving me the confidence and creating more of a safe space for me to be at work and do better at work, because that then also affected how I was at work, which affected the work I produced. So there is so much more I could have done in my role as head of finance, or finance positions across my career. I could have done so much more and been so much better if I had the confidence within myself to put myself forward more. Because I'm a smart girl, right? And there's lots of, I'm a problem solver, and in my work today, I'm great at getting right to the core of an issue, but I didn't exercise that in the workplace because I didn't feel that safety and self-confidence. So big difference if I was aware.
I mean, I can relate to so much of that because I find myself, we talked before, haven't we, about being kind of in similar places in our journey. And I think when you get to a point where you are running your own business, it gives you that confidence to be able to talk about things that you might not have raised before when you were in workplaces and maybe you hadn't, in inverted commas, proved yourself, even just to yourself. And I put out a social media post recently about how I failed to get to even the interview stage of a big retailer for a job in their head office because I failed the numerical reasoning test. This was years and years and years ago. And I have a maths degree.
I hate them.
Head of data in a company. I've taught people how to interpret and analyze data. You think like, I'm good at the stuff that was supposed to test for, and I failed it. And at the time, I didn't understand why. So I just thought, I specifically remember walking down Clapham High Street in London and taking the call on my birthday to tell me that I hadn't got through because it was like through a recruiter. And I remember just coming off it and bursting out crying and thinking, I don't understand like how, I'm clearly not as good. I must have just fluked my maths degree. Like I'm not very good at this kind of stuff. And then you look back and I'm like, well, of course, now I talk about how the test failed. I didn't fail. The test didn't actually test for what it wanted to test for. And I should have passed that test. And then when I put that post out a couple of weeks ago, I had so many people contact me saying, thank you so much for sharing your story. Kind of, I'm going through this at the moment. And I was like, I just feel like I'm in a really lucky position now that I can talk about it because it doesn't affect my confidence anymore. And I just feel for all these people that are at that stage where they feel like that is actually a reflection of their capability. And it's just not.
I mean,
big sigh.
I'm with you. I'm totally with you. And same with those reasoning. I've hated them forever, but we have maths degrees, and I can do. It doesn't make sense.
Let me show you what I can do. Like this is not in that way because it doesn't make any sense. But and so when we were talking, when we were preparing for the podcast, you talked about kind of lack of community and mentorship and guidance. Like, do you think, or how has being Black and neurodivergent impacted that?
Yeah, and I think this links back, I don't know if I mentioned earlier, but to the Black community is not, in my experience, and I can obviously talk with my family and the friends that I speak to and their experience, we don't really talk much about mental health, especially the older generation, or learning differences or difficulties, or in my household, it was, you just get on with it. You just fix it. You just solve it. So I didn't bring any of those problems back home. I just got on with it, which meant that obviously some things weren't dealt with. So that in my head, I wasn't actually even aware that going and getting support was a thing. Like genuinely, mentorship, coaching, sponsor. Like I didn't know those words. They weren't part of my vocab. So coming out of that kind of bubble and seeing how much support there is, whether it's networks, communities, or just having a mentor, all of, it's phenomenal. And I think I posted about this the other day on LinkedIn, actually, and just, it's slightly different, but talking about the power and the importance of sharing knowledge and expertise and communicating. Again, once upon a time, I was like, everyone's just chatting. Why are you guys just talk? What's all this chat? That was as simple as my thought was. But now it's like, hell yeah. Teach, share, communicate, pass on that knowledge, provide a lending hand, so important. And if I had that minus how many years, it would be completely different. So people, and that kind of goes back to, again, a LinkedIn post I made when I was diagnosed. I did a big post about it, and I can't say it went viral because there's a certain number it's got to get, but it blew up completely. I had complete strangers in my inbox, again, about diagnosis, about, lots of Black men as well, which I thought was really amazing. because I don't see many Black men talking about this stuff, reaching out and connecting with me because they know me, so they feel safe. And which is a large part of the work I do, is creating spaces where people feel safe to go through that journey, whether it's the financial journey or being neurodivergent and being an other in some way, because it's life-changing completely.
Yeah, totally. And it's actually really interesting hearing you talk about kind of the like Black men getting in touch with you, because we're running this is a mini podcast series at the moment, hoping to extend it, and so we have 4 episodes, and all of them are with women, and I didn't only reach out to women. I did reach out to other people, Black people of other genders, and I am so pleased with the guests I've got, don't get me wrong. But I think it really does show that some people, it's a lot of Black people in general don't feel safe to talk about this stuff at the moment, but I think you're absolutely right, it's even heightened for Black men. It's very difficult. And this is a really big question, do you think it's changing? Do you think it's changing in the Black community, in terms of destigmatizing mental health, neurodivergence and things like that? Obviously, we're as a society, we're still on a journey. It's not done for anybody. No, but do you think it's changing?
It's difficult because I'm not old, so I mean I'm almost 40, and but there's generations and generations, and my exposure to the state of mental health discussions and acceptance and awareness is obviously limited. But from my narrowed space, what I can see, the fact that is it what they called ADHD girls or ADHD babes? I can't remember, but they're a community of Black women who are ADHDers. Amazing. Or there's a bunch of mainly women, of course, Black dyslexic women who are really showing up and being a pillar in the community to show that it's okay. And I guess I did a podcast with Timmy, Mr. Moniger, the other day, and we spoke about, why is it important to talk about this stuff? And for exactly what we're saying here, and especially the Black community, because of how much harm can be done or is done by us not talking about these things. So even if, we forget the Black part of it, just generally when it comes to the mental health problems that are created sometimes off the back of these differences, depression, anxiety, etc., they can be really crippling and life-threatening, as we know. And then if we switch it over to men and the suicide rates, and then we compound in being Black, it can create so many problems. So from what I've seen, and my point here is about social media being really powerful. Obviously, I'm sure everybody has a bit of a mixed bag opinion of social media, but those kind of areas I'm really encouraged, because you hear so much positive stories off the back of people relating, like your post, connecting, becoming more self-aware, confident, getting the help and being better overall. So my naive kind of answer would be yes, it's getting better, but there's still obviously loads to be done, for sure.
Yeah, slowly. That's how I feel with everything. We are moving, but it's slow. And like you said about social media, really interesting. In episode 1, we had Aditi who was talking about exactly that and saying how she feels that the impact social media has had is incredibly positive kind of in the Indian community, because without it, you just don't have it. There's a real stigmatized view in more mainstream media, and it needs to be changed, and social media is one way of changing that. So and I hope it changes quicker than it is now, but anything we can do to when I say we, society can do to open up these conversations is a powerful thing. And to touch on something you mentioned a little while ago, around diagnosis, and what that's like for Black people, there's so much that is linked in here, because you have the kind of mental health crisis in general, and then kind of the exacerbation of that if you're Black, if you're undiagnosed, maybe you're undiagnosed partly because you're Black, and we just don't understand all these things, and it's just so much to it. And I've got on episode 4 coming up, we have Marsha from Black Zen Mamas, and one of the things I know she wants to talk about is exactly that. So I can't remember the stats off the top of my head either, but I'm sure she will bring them about for every kind of white boy who's diagnosed as neurodivergent, the number of I think maybe it's every 10, however many black children or black girls specifically maybe, and it's just it's shockingly bad, and so much needs to change because so much is embedded in our systems and everyone's unconscious bias, and I think we just need to I wish more people accepted all of the unlearning we have to do as a society to actually tackle institutional racism and everything that exists within all of these processes, but we are, some of us are trying, so long way to go, and I can't believe we've had half an hour already. I feel like we've literally just started, Krystal, but yeah, I would love to talk to you in the future about so many more things, and there's as you've touched on as we've gone through this conversation, there's little snippets that could be entire episodes in their own right, so I would really love to have you back at some point. But before we go, tell everybody where they can find out more about you and what you do.
Sure thing. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn a lot, so find me there, all the letters, as you can see in my name. And you can find my website, krystlmcgilvery.com, my other business website, we are mindovermoney.com, and all the socials under those names as well.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming along. It's been a pleasure to chat as always. And I hope to speak to you on another episode soon.
Yes, thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And for more information about the work that Differing Minds do, please check out our website, www.differingminds.co.uk.